Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with my library tour. We're doing this East Wall, which is all history. So if you're not interested in history, you might as well skip this video. And I am down to the bottom shelf. That's why I'm in puppy territory down here. I'm down on the floor. And glancing at the shelf, this last shelf that we're doing, I notice a theme. There have been themes in this one bookcase. I think they disappear completely after this, even in history. I mean, it's grouped by genre. Yes, it's history, but I think the themes disappear immediately after this. And the theme I'm noticing, at least for the first half of this last shelf of this bookcase, is the American Revolution, which should come as no surprise to anybody who's been watching this channel for a while, since I am in Boston. I'm in Greater Boston, and Boston was the heart of the American Revolution and the source of America's independence. And since America is the greatest country in the history of the world, it follows by the transitive property that Boston must be the greatest city in the history of the world. Don't check the math. It's very complicated. Just trust me. And I'm noticing that in these first few books. Like, for instance, here we have Holger Hoek's Scars of Independence, which is a military history of the United States, of the American Revolution, and a really good one. I really enjoyed it. I think that's why I kept it, even though I have no shortage of such things. But then, like World War II, the American Revolution has prompted an enormous number of one-volume, big, comprehensive, soup-to-nuts narrative histories, as opposed to people picking apart a battle or picking apart one aspect, like the military, the wars, or one aspect like the diplomacy. Instead, you'll often get big books on the whole subject, and I have a few of those. I have, for instance, Robert Middlecoff's The Glorious Cause, which is just fantastic, just holds up so well, even today. I mean, it's a bit on the old side. Same thing with this one. This is someone that I've recommended before. I've mentioned him before. I recommend him strongly. He is a great military historian. This is Robert Leckie. We saw him for, what was it? Delivered from Evil, his one-volume book about the World War II. And this is George Washington's War, his one-volume book about the American Revolution. Same classic illustrated cover. They don't make them like these anymore. I'm not sure whether or not that's a bad thing. But this is, it's really good on personalities. He stops whenever he encounters a new personality. He knows perfectly well, as does any author of any of these kinds of narrative histories, that every personality is larger than life, and that all of them have spawned hundreds of books. So every time he gets to one of those people, he pauses and gives you his own thumbprint overview of them. And often those overviews are fantastic, but the highlight of the book is his ability to clarify and narrate military operations. Not every historian can do that. Most of them are terrible at it, and most of the military historians are terrible at the rest. So it's nice to find a good combination. Okay. Oh my. All right. Well, this is old. This is from 1976. And even before that. I mean, the book is older than that. And boy, oh boy, my copy shows. This was Once Upon a Time, before Holger Hoek, before Middlecoff. This was Once Upon a Time, sort of the standard book of the type that I'm talking about. It was in schools. It was in bookstores. Everybody read it. This is by George Shearer and Hugh Rankin. This is Rebels and Redcoats. I have a very odd 1970s kind of cover. I don't think that's how that guy dressed under ordinary circumstances. It's terrific. That's why I kept it. Is all of these big, even Steele and Commander, all of these big narrative histories of the Revolution are usually have something to recommend them. I could easily fill a whole bookcase with them. In fact, I don't think there's a famous one by Steele and Commander that I don't have. I also don't have, there was a very famous multi-reprinted book called Spear to 76, which was sort of an oral history of the beginning of the Revolution. I don't have that either, and a whole bunch of others too. Okay. All right. But, okay, so when I say that these big narrative histories of the war, of the whole phenomenon of the Revolution, all the people in it, are common, you might wonder, if you're watching this channel, and after 3,000 videos, I honestly don't know why you would be, but if you are, you might be wondering, okay, well, do you have a favorite? Or do you have one that you recommend to people? And I do. I've recommended it on this channel many times before. This is A.J. Langouth. This is Patriots. And as you can tell from the subtitle, this one is basically just a personal look at those larger-than-life personalities, Samuel Adams, John Adams, George Washington, Hancock, King George III, all of the generals in the field. It's wonderful. Langguth writes like nobody. Just amazing. I have recommended this book many times on this channel before. All I can say is, with my strongest recommendations, I always say the same thing, which is, you don't even need me to convince you. Just try it. This will be in your bookstore. This is still in print. So go into a bookstore. Go to the history section. Don't ask. If it's a Barnes & Noble, don't go to the desk and ask for help. Okay? Because if you ask, I'm looking for a book on the Patriots, and I'm wondering where your history section is, the kid at the desk, who will have a metal ring through one of his eyelids, who will scarcely look up from what he's doing, will negligently tell you, no, if it's about the Patriots, then it's going to be in sports. So don't bother. Don't bother. Just find the history section on your own. This book will almost certainly be there. It's modeled for every Barnes & Noble in America. And just start it. Take it to an easy chair if you can find one that doesn't have a drunken derelict on it, or take it to a chair in the cafe if you can find one that isn't staked out by a neck-bearded tech whiz, and read a few pages. That's all it'll take. This is terrific. And I'm very glad in a way. It's terrific, and therefore I'm very glad in a way that I have it, because I give away things like this all the time. I'm noticing this in this library tour. How many books I don't have because I give them away. Okay, all right. This is by Michael Stevenson. This is Patriot Battles. This is much like what was it? Scars of Independence. This is more military. It's even got the same period kind of artwork on the cover. This is more a military look, a look at the battles, the various battles and whatnot, the successive string of miracles by which George Washington managed not to lose the country, despite being the worst general that the country's ever put in the field. So, it's not a particularly detailed or groundbreaking study. I just like it. I like the way it's done. Okay, all right. This is an advance copy from 2013, before we knew each other. This is by Brian Deming, and this is Boston and the Dawn of American Independence. Whenever you have a book on Boston during the Revolutionary era, it's always going to be some variation on Paul Revere's print of the Boston Massacre. This is a variation on that print, and you're always going to have that. It's always going to be a line of redcoats firing into a crowd of helpless people, which is how the Boston Massacre is characterized even to this day. Not solely because of Paul Revere. The massacre wasn't like that at all. It wasn't like that at all. But not only is that still the characterization today because of the Johnny on the spot, immediate visualization that Paul Revere did, but also because of the even prompter and even more effective propaganda warfare about this incident that was waged by Samuel Adams, that guy in the painting up there, who seized on it immediately for its potential to inflame the whole of the colonies, even the South. And it worked. It absolutely worked. It worked to such a degree that people finding out, reading books on the Boston Massacre today and finding out how it actually went down, and almost certainly what was involved, are astonished. They're astonished. What? It wasn't a line of well-regimented redcoats firing onto an innocent crowd of bystanders? What? All right. Okay, this next is 2 volumes. And this is also a soup to nuts history of the American Revolution, only it's much more detailed because it's 2 volumes. This is the great Page Smith, who did a multi-volume history of the United States, just in general. And the first 2 volumes of that history were called A New Age Begins. The New Age Now Begins. See that? And it's just a 2-volume. It was so big, the amount of work that he did was so big, that he did it in 2 volumes. I have it in these trade paperbacks. I wish I had all of Page Smith. I wish I had that whole set. There's a whole set. Who is this? Penguin? Yeah, there's a whole set that they did in these trade paperbacks with different colored spines, and I don't think I have any other Page Smith. I wish I did. I will look for them. The hardcovers in this set are great big bricks of things, and they have a boring monochrome gold dust jackets, and they're uncomfortable to read. They're uncomfortable to move around. The trade paperbacks are what I would look for, so I always hope that I will see them, and yet, same old story. And when I get them, at the book barn in Niantic, Connecticut, or wherever else. I reread them. I love them. I say, boy, I really need to hold on to these. I go back to these all the time, and then I give them away. Because Page Smith is so wonderful to read that it's easy to give away. I have to stop doing that. Okay. This is Dean Snow. This is 1777. Tipping Point at Saratoga. One of innumerable books. Every year you will see some new book on the American Revolution that centers on a year. 1776, 1777, 1774, 1772, 1780. Inevitably. There have been many, many books on every single year. There's a new one coming out next year called 1774. That's just part of this tradition where historians will bore down onto 1 year and see what it can tell them. And I love that. There have been quite a few of them. I think this is the only book I have on the American Revolution that has a year in the title. But there have been hundreds of them that I could have in addition. And have had. I've read almost all of them. Okay. All right. This is a book that had to be published by the Independent Institute in Oakland, California. And that's a shame because it has nothing but the truth to tell. This is by William Watkins, and it's called Crossroads for Liberty. Rediscovering the anti-federalist values of America's first Constitution. And this is all about the Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution that the United States, that the colonies put together. That in textbooks on the American Revolution, every single one of the ones that we just saw, and in textbooks about American history, inevitably, I've never seen it not be true, inevitably, the Articles of Confederation are pilloried as a weak and flawed document that would have led to the immediate destruction of the country. And that inevitably, even after all this time, the Federalist propaganda machine pumping enthusiasm for the federal Constitution, for the current Constitution of the United States of America, wins out. Usually without even a second glance. as if the assemblage of incredibly smart and worldly and well-read men who put together the Articles of Confederation were somehow all, I don't know, they were temporarily imbeciles when they put together the Articles of Confederation, and then they all became surpassing geniuses when they put together the Constitution a year later. No. No. You only have to look at the Constitution of the United States to see that it is a severely flawed document. You only have to look at the subject of slavery to have that highlighted for you, but there are flaws all throughout it, not just that. And what we have been doing for the last 200 years in this country is slowly and steadily amending those flaws, fixing the Constitution. It hasn't been written in stone that whole time. We have been slowly but surely hedging it around with a great impact-softening thicket of laws and changes. And the same thing would have happened to the Articles of Confederation. So it is inherently no more flawed than the United States Constitution that succeeded it, and it has a huge strength. You can see it in the subtitle of this book. It has a huge strength, which is that it was anti-federalist. Every state was its own country, and you were the United States of America. You weren't the United States of America under some money-suctioning thing that called the federal government, that none of us fought for, that most of us fought against, and that supersedes our own authority on the state level, that supersedes our state's authority. None of us fought for that. None of us wanted that. And the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, reflects that. The Articles of Confederation are rabidly anti-federalist. They are rabidly against the idea of concentrating enormous amounts of uncheckable power in a federal government where no one lives. No one lives in the federal government. There's no place of land called the federal government. There are no houses with people in them in the federal government. It's an abstraction. And because it's an abstraction, there's no limit on how big it can get or how greedy it can be. And we have seen that in America. The federal government botches almost everything it touches and pauperizes people in the process. And it shouldn't be able to do that. It shouldn't be allowed to do that. And I have heard so many uppity college undergraduates say, no, hey man, if we had the Articles of Confederation, we'd have been picked off by the first big power that wanted to fight us because we wouldn't band together. Yeah. I've actually had college undergraduates tell me that you need the United States Constitution to get all those separate states to band together. In which case, I try to be gentle, but I want to point out, okay, well, where was the Constitution in 1776? States didn't have a problem banding together then. It was their own survival that made them do it, and profit. So, just don't get me started. Although you didn't, and I started anyway. I'm self-starting. This is a delightful look at the Articles of Confederation. I wish there were more like it. Most of the books on the Articles of Confederation start out from the assumption that they're dealing with a badly flawed and stupid document that would never have worked for more than, say, a year. The detail that these people always bring up is that states had different currencies, that states could charge tariffs on different states, as if that wouldn't have been worked out in the first 10 years. If it looks unworkable on paper at the beginning, like certain clauses I could point out about slavery in the Constitution, if it looks unworkable at the beginning, it would have been worked out. And what wouldn't have happened is that it wouldn't have been worked out at the cost of your own freedom, which it now has. It now has done. Because if you are sitting in your home in America, in Florida, or Vermont, or the former Republic of Texas, or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the federal government decides to arrest you, the federal government does not even have to consult with your state government. Their emissaries will be at your door, and you will be hauled away to a cell in Washington, D.C., which isn't even a state, or to some, place outside of America where the federal government gets to send you. And that's all there is to it. Not only should that not be possible, but the thing that does that shouldn't exist. Anyway, if you are a foreign power and you want to deal with the United States of America, you should have to deal with the United States of America in Congress assembled, not with this thing. This thing that nobody likes, whose approval ratings are always at the bottom of the barrel every year in every poll of either party. Anyway, that does it for the American Revolution. Then we move on to miscellaneous, and I'm afraid it stays. Those of you who are have orderly, tidy souls, I'm afraid you're in for a nightmare because it stays disorderly for the rest of this. The first one is by James Mann, who's wonderfully The Rise of the Vulcans, and this is the Rebellion of Ronald Reagan. No idea why they chose to put Leonid Brezhnev on the cover of this. This is the worst Reagan portrait ever. I don't even know, I'm off the top of my head, if Reagan liked this portrait, but one way or another, the resemblance couldn't be greater to Brezhnev. They look like the exact same person. Do I have a picture of Brezhnev? Aside from the pompadour, they look like the same person. And this is a worshipful treatment of Ronnie Reagan and how he was his own man and his own maverick against all the forces aligned against him and freedom. And it's delightful. I loved it. Oh, okay, great. I didn't think I still had this. This is by Alistair Bellany and Thomas Cogswell. So I'm suspecting they might be British. This is The Murder of King James I. A big, thick thing in which was one of a couple of books on this subject that I think I still have. I think I have a couple of other books on this subject. And this is just what it says. This is a story of the idea that King James was murdered, that he was poisoned. And if so, who? And if so, who did it? And the suspicions fall on one person only, but still. These two make a great story out of it. I loved it. I was reading along. I don't agree that King James was murdered, but I had a great time reading along. This is just really, really captivating history. Anyway, even if you disagree with the authors. Okay, this is fantastic. All right, this is Jay Winnick. This is The Great Upheaval, America and the Birth of the Modern World. A very short period of time, 1788 to 1800. But Winnick does a great job making it feel like the most pivotal period in American history. Just incredible. Every American will have their own list of candidates of the most pivotal period in American history. 1788 to 1800 would not be one of mine, but still, I myself think, of course, the years in which the colonies became a country, in which they fought for their own independence, is more pivotal. And also, I might say, That was the first time that Boston saved the country. And the second time that Boston saved the country was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I might say that was more pivotal too, but I had a great time with this book. One of these big, fat survey volumes that I just love. Okay, all right, speak of the devil. Here's another big, fat survey volume. This is What Hath God Wrought by Daniel Walker Howe. And this is from 1850 to 1848. So the growing pains of a newly founded country, all the way through the pivotal years up to the rapid slide down to the Civil War. So here you get from John Quincy Adams to Andrew Jackson and all of the politicians involved and all of the crises that racked the country from beginning to end. And Walker Howe he's a slightly dry writer, but you get used to his rhythm after a little while, and it becomes just amazing. Such an amazing story. I had such a fun time reviewing this book. Again and again, I will try to remember to leave reviews of anything here that I've written out. Oh, okay. This is Larry Commons and Dominic Lapierre. This is an older book. This is Freedom at Midnight, about the partition, about India and about Indian freedom. There you've got the king, the final emperor of India, and Gandhi, and these two are great. They wrote a handful of books together. They're all those books are wonderful. I wish I had them all. I think this is the only one I have. And also, I believe this is one of the only works of Indian history that I have. I could be wrong about that. Oh. Hey, baby. What you doing? Huh? What you doing? What are you doing? Huh? Ooh. What are you doing? You're just futzing around down here? Easy busy bee. Okay, I quite forget where we were. The bean does that to me. Oh, right. Okay, we're doing a bookshelf tour. Okay, hi, baby. Let's see here. Okay, this next one is Charles Pellegrino. This is an incredible book. Incredible. You really, even if you're not a history fan, you really should. This is one of the rare books on this library tour where even if you're not a history fan, I don't know why you'd be watching it at 22 minutes, but even if you're not big into works of history, you should find this book and read it right away. Get it from your library. This is Ghosts of Vesuvius, and it is almost unclassifiable. It's a study of Pompeii and what exactly happened and the exact order in which it happened and how a city was entombed. But it's also a study of catastrophic physics. There's an enormous amount in here about the destruction of the Twin Towers and what that was like. Not so much, on that beautiful Tuesday morning, but rather what actually happened and what were the physics involved. How did this happen? How did specific things happen? So you have this tower that reaches up into the sky. It crashes down in 10 seconds, seemingly pulverizing everything inside it. And yet you have things that were ejected. And sometimes those things that were ejected stayed together so that you would have one whole drawer of a filing cabinet 3 blocks away, intact, unseared, still legible. Everything's still in order. Nothing moved. Why does that happen? Why? What are the physics behind that? And there are some other things. I mean, the Pellegrino is famous for this sort of thing. This is his best book by far. And even so, he pulls his punches here. He doesn't deal with all of the grisly 9/11 stuff that he could, even in terms of physics. When you get to catastrophic levels like that, mysterious things happen, and there's no way to account for some of them. The story of someone walking through the opaque clouds of dust after the first tower fell. Second tower still standing, and no ability to see at all. Car alarms going off, fires from cars, flaming bits of debris everywhere. People walking through there, calling out to see if anybody needs help. One such person got a response. A woman said, he could hear a woman calling back to him. He went and found her flat on the ground, and she had jumped and survived. She was alive. This rescue worker could look at her and see that her injuries were fatal. They were catastrophic. It wouldn't be possible even to get her up off the cement, much less save her life. Half her body had exploded. But she was not only still alive, but conscious, and was saying over and over again, "Tell my daughter I'm alive. Tell my daughter I'm alive." And the rescue worker had to leave her, of course. There was no way to save her. It was pure triage in those early moments. So he had to leave her. He reassured her, and then he left her. And as he's walking away into the dust, 1 second later, he can't see her anymore, but he can still hear her saying, "I'm alive. Tell my daughter I'm alive." Because she jumped from 100 stories and lived. At least a little while, lived. And Pellegrino could go into, there are all sorts of questions like that, stuff that happened in the basements of these two buildings, people who were in the basements when the whole world collapsed on top of them. But this still gets into a lot of specifics like that, and it is fascinating. And you might think that linking it to something like Vesuvius, to Pompeii, which is, as 2,000 years old, would be in a way kind of vaguely insulting, and it's not. It's not at all. Instead, it's eye-opening. Just incredible. Just incredible. Can't praise it highly enough. Okay. This is recent. This is from last year, I believe. This was, these books they're taking a gruesome turn here. I think this was, this was June of 2017. Boy, though, was it good. This is by Michael Wallace. This is The Best Land Under Heaven. And it is a book about the Donner Party. That's tremendously good. It's, there's a standard book about the Donner Party called Ordeal by Hunger. Those of you who are maybe not familiar with the minutiae of American history, although the Donner Party belongs to the world now. They were Western settlers. They were misguided, took a couple of horrible wrong turns, and ended up in one of the worst winters that their area had ever seen, with no provisions and no way to get out, and resorted to cannibalism. Now, they were not the only ones in such situations to do that, but somehow or other, fair or not, they became emblematic of that. There was a great, I think, Ken Burns documentary, one of his earliest documentaries, that was just tremendously good. And Ordeal by Hunger is very good, but this is even better. This puts the Donner Party in a much broader spectrum of what would drive people to do what the Donner Party did, knowing that they might face the Donner Party's fate. It provided a lot of intelligent context that I'd been missing from any other Donner Party book that I've ever read. So I highly recommend it. I don't know if it ever came out in paperback. Maybe not. Okay, all right. This is from 10 years ago, at least. Right? This is from 2006. This is Christopher Tyerman's God's War, about the Crusades. Just gigantic thing about the Crusades. I had a friend who worked at the New York Review of Books at the time, got me the advance copy of this when, in 2006, I, of course, was not in the reviewing world. I was happily selling books to you. I was happily manning my information desk during the lunch rush from noon to 2. And then all the rest of the time, I mean, you have to stretch out the day somehow. I certainly wasn't going to work. So all the rest of the time, I would just wander around. I would ask customers what they were doing. I would poke into their bags. They'd say, "Do you work here?" And I'd say, "Not really. I show up every day." Or they would say, "Oh, you. Okay, I'm glad you're here. I have a request. I didn't go to your information desk because you had a mob of people, but now that you found me, here's my question." Or I would go to the registers and make fun of the people at the registers, or I would find some coworker to mock, or I would go up to the manager's office and sit down and say, "You people don't look like you're working very hard." And they'd say, "We could fire you." And I'd say, "Good luck with that." But from noon to 2, I was yours. I was all yours. I was your creature. I was there to answer your questions. I was there to make recommendations. I was there to bring you books. I was there to take your books. I was there to talk. I wasn't thinking about book reviewing. Wasn't thinking I would ever get back into book reviewing. I wasn't thinking the book reviewing would want me back either. Usually it's a young go-getter's game, and I thought my time had passed. But I've had a friend who worked at the New York Review of Books, and he got me the advance copy of this. It was just going to be discarded. The review was done with it. And I read it. I admit I felt a twinge when I read it. I felt a twinge of, boy, oh boy, you used to get all of these things in the mail, and now you don't get any of them anymore unless there's a handful. Always at any bookstore, there'll be a handful of review copies that show up in the break room table. They're usually just the kind of books you would expect to show up there, and I wasn't usually interested in them. I read it, and I read it with a bit of guilt because, as I've mentioned on this channel before, the Crusades just don't do it for me. They just don't. I know they are a source of such huge, perennial fascination for so many readers, but they've never been that for me. This started to tip the balance. This and Evan Connell's book, Deus Lo Volt, started to tip the balance to make me... what I needed was an enormous narrative history like this, and this is the best one I've ever read. And it started to tip the balance. I look at new crusading books with a far more charitable eye now. And then we'll do the last one here. So it turns out yesterday's video, in which we did 20 books in 20 minutes, was a bit of a fluke. So this is a trade paperback of Eric Weitz's Weimar Germany, Promise and Tragedy. Just what I consider to be one of the best studies of Weimar Germany that I've ever read. And that is it. That is it. That is the last shelf on this bookcase. So we had a lot of American Revolution and then a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. And we went from World War II to World War I to American Revolution, and a lot of you have been emailing me. I keep in mind my email is st.donahue@gmail.com. Email me at any time about anything you like. A lot of you have been emailing me and saying, isn't there a rather conspicuous omission here? What about the American Civil War? More written about than any subject in American history. Tens of thousands of books. What about the American Civil War? Shouldn't you have a whole bookcase full of books on the American Civil War? Well, they're certainly not on this shelf. We're moving on to the next shelf tomorrow, I think. So, or maybe no, maybe we skip library tours on the weekends. I don't know. But one way or another, yeah, yeah. There have been tens of thousands of books on the American Civil War, and I don't appear to have many of them. So we're gonna have to figure that out. We'll figure that out. But in the meantime, I'm gonna wrap this up. This has gone on way too long. So I will finish this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.